We're counting down the 30 forgotten Hooverville meals desperate families cooked during the Great Depression. These are the dishes that kept America alive when the banks closed, the jobs vanished, and shantytowns of tar paper and packing crates sprang up on the edge of every city. From soups stretched thin with hot water to pies made without a single piece of fruit, each entry tells a story of hunger, invention, and the stubborn will to feed a family on almost nothing. Expect ingredients you'd never call food today, recipes born in the mud of a Hooverville, and flavors forged when a nickel had to feed 5 mouths. Which desperate dinner tops the list? Let's begin our countdown with number 30. Number 30. Onion sandwiches were what a mother served when the bread box held nothing but a heel of loaf and a single onion. She'd slice the onion paper thin, lay it between 2 pieces of white bread, and if the family was lucky, spread a whisper of margarine. In 1932, an onion cost a penny, and a loaf hovered around 7 cents, so a full plate cost a dime. Children learned not to complain about the sting, because the alternative was an empty table. The onion sandwich carried no pretense of luxury. It was simply proof that the family had not yet run out of everything, that there was still bread to hold and something to put on it. Number 29. Ketchup soup showed just how far a family would go to feel full. A mother took a bottle of ketchup, sometimes swiped free from a diner counter, emptied it into a pot, then filled the bottle with hot water to rinse every last drop into the pan. Boiled together, it became a thin red broth that tasted faintly of tomato and vinegar and warmed a cold stomach for a few minutes. In a Hooverville tent where the wind cut through the walls, warmth mattered more than substance. It was a trick, a way to turn free condiments into a meal. And for the children who drank it from tin cups, it was the taste of a family refusing to admit defeat. Number 28. Milquetoast brought a rare gentleness to hard mornings. A mother toasted a slice of bread over the coals, laid it in a bowl, and poured warm milk over the top with a dusting of sugar and a knob of margarine if she had it. The bread softened into something tender and soothing, kind to empty stomachs and to the sick. A quart of milk cost around 10 cents, and families stretched it across the week. Milquetoast was handed to a feverish child, to a grandmother whose teeth had gone, to anyone who needed comfort more than calories. The warmth, the sweetness, the way the spoons sank through the soggy bread. All of it felt like care in a time when care was often all a parent had left to give. Number 27. Bread and lard was austerity stripped to the bone. When there was no meat and no butter, a mother reached for the tin of lard rendered from a scrap of fatback, spread it thick across a slice of bread, and finished it with a heavy shake of salt. Greasy, filling, and cheap enough to feed a household for pennies, lard sold for a few cents a pound and kept for weeks without ice. Children ate it walking to school, the fat coating their empty bellies long enough to make it through the morning. Some families sprinkled a little sugar over the top, turning a survival ration into something a child might look forward to. Bread and lard promised nothing but fuel, and in the leanest weeks, fuel was exactly what a family needed. Number 26. Sugar bread was the closest thing to dessert in many Hooverville homes. A mother buttered a slice of bread, sprinkled sugar and a dash of cinnamon across the top, and handed it to a child as a treat. In a decade when candy was an impossible luxury and a birthday cake could bankrupt a week's budget, this simple slice was pure delight. Some toasted the bread first so the sugar melted into a thin, crackling crust, a small burst of sweetness in a childhood otherwise shaped by scarcity. Parents watched their children eat it with a mix of pride and quiet sorrow, glad to give a treat, aware of how little that treat truly was. Number 25. Fried cornmeal mush anchored breakfast tables from the hills of Appalachia to the alleys of Chicago's Hoovervilles. The night before, a mother boiled cornmeal with water and salt into a thick porridge, poured it into a loaf pan, and let it set firm overnight. Come morning, she sliced it, fried the pieces in a little grease until the edges turned golden and crisp, and served them with molasses or syrup. Cornmeal was among the cheapest foods in America, often handed out through relief programs, and a single sack could feed a family for days. The mush was soft inside and crunchy outside, filling and forgiving of a thin pantry. A golden slice of survival that asked only for cornmeal, a hot pan, and the patience to wait for it to brown. Number 24. Dandelion greens turned the weeds of a vacant lot into a plate of food. When the garden held nothing and the relief check had run dry, mothers and children fanned out across empty fields and roadsides to gather the tender young leaves before they turned bitter. Boiled with a scrap of bacon fat or fried with onion, they delivered vitamins a diet of bread and lard could never provide. They cost nothing but the labor of picking, and in a Hooverville, labor was the one thing families had in abundance. Foraging became a quiet ritual, a way for children to feel useful. The dandelion, cursed by every lawnkeeper, became a lifeline. In the hungriest springs, those bright green leaves meant a family would not go without something living and fresh. Number 23. Chicory coffee stretched a precious luxury across the leanest months. Real coffee was expensive, and in a Hooverville a full can was a treasure to be guarded. So families dug chicory root, roasted it dark, ground it fine, and mixed it with whatever real coffee they had, sometimes eliminating the coffee altogether. The brew came out bitter and deep, close enough to fool a tired tongue at dawn. That cup mattered more than its cost suggested. The small dignity a man carried into another day of standing in line. Chicory made the ritual survive, one bitter cup at a time, one of the few comforts the Depression could not entirely take away. Number 22. Prune pudding earned a strange fame when it appeared on the White House menu itself. Eleanor Roosevelt, determined to set an example of thrift, served economy meals to visiting dignitaries. And this humble dessert of stewed prunes, thickened with cornstarch and sugar, became a symbol of national belt-tightening. In ordinary Hoovervilles, it was simply a way to make something sweet from cheap dried fruit that kept forever. A mother simmered the prunes soft, stirred in sugar and cornstarch until it set, and spooned it into bowls. Tart and sweet at once, it was gentle on the stomach and rich in the fiber a bread-heavy diet lacked. Prune pudding proved that even in the hardest years, the poorest kitchen in a shanty town could serve the very same dish being eaten in the president's house. Number 21. Water pie. Sounds like a joke until you taste it, and then you understand the genius of desperation. With no fruit, no cream, and barely any butter, a Southern mother could still set a pie on the table using nothing but water as the filling. She poured water into an unbaked crust, sprinkled in flour and sugar to thicken it, dotted the surface with tiny pieces of butter, added a splash of vanilla, and baked it low and slow. As it cooked, the filling transformed into a translucent, custard-like sweetness, relying only on pantry staples that never spoiled. Water pie was invention at its purest, a dish born entirely of what wasn't there, sweet proof that a determined cook could pull something wonderful from almost literally nothing. Number 20. Vinegar pie played the same trick with a sharper edge, standing in for lemon when citrus was a luxury no Hooverville could afford. A tablespoon or two of vinegar stirred into a filling of sugar, flour, eggs if the hens were laying, and water mimicked the bright tang of a lemon meringue. Baked into a flaky crust, it came out tart and sweet, fooling many a child who had never tasted the real thing. Vinegar was a staple in every kitchen, cheap and everlasting, and frontier families had made this pie for generations before the Depression brought the old recipe roaring back. It was comfort conjured from a bottle in the cupboard, and for a Sunday table stripped of every luxury, the illusion of one was enough. Number 19. Mock apple pie carried the illusion even further, building a convincing apple pie without a single apple. When Ritz crackers arrived in 1934, resourceful cooks discovered that the crackers, broken into a syrup of sugar, water, cream of tartar, cinnamon, and lemon, softened into a filling that tasted uncannily like spiced apples. Baked in a crust, it fooled the eyes, the nose, and the tongue. Apples were seasonal and often unaffordable, but a box of crackers could be had cheaply and kept indefinitely. Families gathered around slices, marveling that no fruit had touched the recipe. Mock apple pie was a small act of defiance, a way of insisting that a family still deserved pie, even when the orchard was empty. Number 18. Peanut butter bread stretched a jar of the cheap, protein-rich spread into a hearty loaf that could stand in for a meal. Rather than spreading peanut butter on bread, cooks folded it directly into a simple batter of flour, sugar, baking powder, and milk, then baked it into a dense, nutty, quick bread that needed no eggs and no butter. Peanut butter was one of the great bargains of the Depression, packed with the fat and protein a hungry family craved, and a single jar could flavor an entire loaf. Sliced thick, the bread filled empty stomachs and lingered longer than plain white ever could, and the smell of it baking filled a cramped shanty with a promise of substance. Peanut butter bread turned a spread into a staple. Number 17. Cracker soup was the meal a family made when the cupboard had emptied down to its last handful of saltines. A mother crushed the crackers into a pot of hot water or thin milk, seasoned it with salt, pepper, and a lump of margarine, and let it soften into a thick, starchy porridge. It cost almost nothing, came together in minutes, and filled a stomach when there was truly nothing else to cook. In the coldest tents of a Hooverville, the warmth alone made it worth the effort. However thin, it was hot and it was food. And on a freezing night, that was enough. Cracker soup carried no pride and no tradition, only necessity, the bowl of softened crumbs that stood between a family and going to bed with nothing at all. Number 16. Creamed chipped beef on toast moved from the military mess hall into Depression kitchens as a cheap way to make a little meat feed a lot of people. Dried, salted beef, sold cheaply in small jars, was torn into shreds and simmered in a white sauce of flour, milk, and margarine, then ladled over toast. A few ounces flavored an entire pan of gravy, stretching a tiny portion of meat across a whole family. Warm and surprisingly satisfying, it delivered the taste of meat where there was barely any at all. Chipped beef kept for ages without refrigeration, and the sauce could be thinned endlessly. It was thrift dressed up as comfort food, a humble gravy that made a jar of dried meat taste like an actual dinner. Number 15. The poor man's meal became one of the most enduring dishes of the entire era, a simple skillet supper that fed a family for pocket change. A cook diced potatoes, fried them with onions until soft and golden, then sliced a single hot dog into the pan and let it crisp among them. Hearty and filling, the potatoes stretched one cheap wiener into a meal for several. Potatoes were among the cheapest calories available, and hot dogs cost little more. The whole skillet came together over one flame, ideal for a Hooverville stove or a hot plate in a rented room. The poor man's meal survived long past the Depression, precisely because it worked so well, turning scarcity into a genuine supper. Number 14. Baked bean sandwiches turned a cheap can of beans into a portable, filling lunch. A mother spread cold or warmed baked beans between two slices of bread, sometimes mashing them slightly so they wouldn't tumble out. and handed the sandwich to a child heading out the door. Canned beans were among the best bargains in any grocery, packed with protein and cheap enough to buy by the case, and a single can filled several sandwiches. The bread soaked up the sweet tomato sauce, and the beans stuck to the ribs long after other lunches would have faded. It was an odd combination by later standards, carbohydrate on carbohydrate, but it delivered maximum fullness for minimum cost. The baked bean sandwich was thrift you could hold in one hand. Number 13. Fried bologna sandwiches elevated the cheapest lunch meat in the case into something a child would race home for. A slice of bologna laid in a hot skillet, curled and browned at the edges, and took on a rich, crisp flavor that raw bologna never had. Slapped between two pieces of bread with a smear of mustard, it became a supper that felt almost indulgent. Bologna was one of the cheapest meats available, and frying it made a single slice taste like far more than it cost. The little cut in the center, made so it would lie flat instead of doming up in the pan, became a small ritual every cook knew. The sizzle told children that meat was on the menu, even if it was only the humblest kind. Number 12. Hot water. Cornbread was the fastest bread a hungry family could make, requiring nothing but cornmeal, salt, and boiling water. A cook stirred hot water into the seasoned cornmeal until it formed a stiff dough, shaped it into small patties, and fried them in a greased skillet until crisp and golden. No eggs, no milk, no leavening, just meal and water and heat. It cooked in minutes and cost mere pennies, a lifeline for the poorest households. The patties came out crunchy outside and tender within, perfect for sopping up beans or greens. Cornmeal flowed freely through relief programs, and hot water cornbread turned that government meal into supper without needing a single other ingredient. Number 11. Beans and cornbread formed the backbone of Depression eating, a pairing so common it became the very definition of getting by. A pot of dried beans, soaked overnight and simmered for hours with a scrap of salt pork or a ham bone delivered cheap, filling protein that could feed a family for days. Alongside a pan of cornbread to sop up the pot liquor, it made a complete meal for pennies. Dried beans cost almost nothing and kept indefinitely, the safest food a poor family could stockpile. The beans simmered all day on the stove, filling the shanty with a smell that promised the children would not go to bed hungry. Plain and endlessly repeated, beans and cornbread carried America through its darkest years, one humble bowl at a time. Number 10. Navy bean soup stretched those same cheap beans even further, turning a handful into a pot that could feed a crowd. A cook simmered the small white beans with an onion, a bit of salt pork, and whatever scraps had accumulated, until the beans broke apart and thickened the broth naturally. A single bag, costing a few cents, became gallons of hearty soup that only improved as it sat. In a Hooverville where families sometimes cooked over a shared fire, a big pot of bean soup fed everyone who brought a bowl. The starch gave it a creamy body without any cream, and it reheated endlessly, growing richer each day. In the coldest months, that steaming pot was survival itself. Number 9. Potato pancakes rescued the humble potato from monotony and turned it into something crisp and craveable. A cook grated raw potatoes, squeezed out the water, bound them with a little flour and an egg, if one could be spared, and fried the mixture into golden cakes. Potatoes were the cheapest reliable food in America, and this dish made the most of them, transforming a plain tuber into a crunchy, savory patty. In immigrant neighborhoods and Hoovervilles alike, the recipe crossed every line, because everyone had potatoes and everyone had a skillet. They proved that even the plainest ingredient could become something worth looking forward to. Number 8. Salmon croquettes brought the taste of fish to inland families who lived hundreds of miles from any coast. A cheap can of pink salmon, mashed bones and all for the calcium, was mixed with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, an egg, and a little onion, then shaped into patties and fried until crisp and brown. Canned salmon was one of the great affordable proteins of the era, shelf-stable and available anywhere a general store stood, and a single can stretched into enough croquettes to feed a whole family. The frying gave them a golden crust that made a humble tin taste like a proper fish dinner. Children who had never seen the ocean grew up on salmon croquettes and remembered them fondly for the rest of their lives. A meal coaxed out of a can that cost only a dime. Number 7. Hoover hog was the bitter nickname Americans gave to the wild game they were forced to hunt when store-bought meat became a fantasy. Jackrabbits, possums, and whatever else could be caught in a field or trap ended up in the pot, sardonically named after the president many blamed for their misery. A possum was cleaned, parboiled, then stewed with sweet potatoes and onions until the meat pulled from the bone. Families across the drought-stricken plains relied on these animals for the only fresh meat they could get. The name carried a sting of dark humor, a way of laughing at hardship even while enduring it. Hoover hog was survival hunting dressed in a joke, a reminder that when the economy failed, Americans turned back to the land. Number 6. Squirrel stew simmered in pots across the countryside, wherever a boy with a slingshot or an old rifle could bring home game. The small animals, plentiful in woods and even city parks, were skinned, cut up, and stewed slowly with onions, potatoes, and any vegetables on hand until the lean meat turned tender and the broth thickened. A couple of squirrels could flavor a whole pot and feed a family that had no money for beef or pork. Hunting them became a daily chore for children, a way to feel the pride of putting meat on the table. The stew cooked low and slow, filling the shanty with a rich, gamey aroma. Squirrel stew was resourcefulness rooted in the land, the meal of families who refused to go without meat entirely and found it in the trees and fields around them. Number 5. Depression cake, also known as wacky cake or crazy cake, performed the miracle of baking a moist chocolate cake without eggs, milk, or butter, the very ingredients most likely to be missing from a Hooverville pantry. Cooks combined flour, cocoa, sugar, baking soda, oil, water, and a splash of vinegar, mixing it all right in the pan to save a bowl. The vinegar reacted with the soda to make the cake rise light and tender, no eggs required, while oil or lard stood in for butter. The result was a rich, dark cake that stayed moist for days and cost a fraction of a normal cake, making it possible to bake a birthday cake even in the leanest week. Depression cake was joy engineered from scarcity, sweet proof that a mother could still give her children a real cake when the icebox was bare. Number 4. Bread pudding refused to let a single stale crust go to waste, transforming yesterday's hardened bread into a warm, comforting dessert. A cook tore the dry bread into a dish, poured over a custard of milk, sugar, and an egg or two, folded in raisins if the pantry allowed, and baked it until the top turned golden and the inside set soft and custardy. Bread was the one thing nearly every family had, and none of it was ever thrown away. So bread pudding appeared whenever the loaf grew too hard to slice. The smell of it baking, sweet and warm with a hint of cinnamon, filled a shanty with the feeling of a proper Sunday. It stretched a few humble ingredients into a dessert that felt generous, that tasted like care rather than hardship. Bread pudding was thrift turned tender. Number 3. Mush and milk was the meal that closed out countless depression days, a bowl of cooked cornmeal porridge topped with whatever milk the family could spare. A cook boiled cornmeal with water and salt into a thick, smooth mush, ladled it steaming into bowls, and poured milk over the top with a sprinkle of sugar for the children. It was cheap, warm, and filling, the kind of simple supper that asked nothing of the pantry but a sack of cornmeal and a cup of milk. In homes where breakfast had been fried mush and lunch had been cornbread, this soft evening bowl completed a day fed almost entirely by corn. The warmth settled hungry children before bed, and the milk added just enough richness to make it feel like a real meal. Mush and milk was the quiet, reliable heart of depression eating, the last warm bowl before the lamp went out. Number 2. Mulligan stew was the great communal meal of the Hoovervilles and hobo camps, a bubbling pot to which everyone contributed whatever they had scavenged that day. One man tossed in a potato, another a handful of foraged carrots, a third a scrap of meat begged from a butcher, or pulled from a trap, and all of it simmered together over a shared fire into a stew that fed the whole camp. Nobody knew exactly what was in it from one night to the next, and that was the point. The stew was survival by cooperation, a way for men with nothing individually to make a real meal together. The big pot bubbled at the edge of the rail yard, drawing hungry travelers with its smell, and no one who brought something was turned away, proof that even at the bottom, Americans found a way to feed one another. And finally, in first place, Hoover stew crowned the desperate tables of the shanty towns that bore the president's name. This was the dish that defined the Hooverville, a pot of macaroni and canned tomatoes stretched with sliced hot dogs and whatever canned corn or beans a family could scrape together. Every ingredient was cheap, shelf-stable, and available through the relief line, which made the stew possible even in the poorest tent. The macaroni swelled to fill the pot, the tomatoes gave it body and tang, and the sliced hot dogs offered the only meat many families would see all week. It cooked in one pot over one flame and reheated for days. The name itself was an accusation, a bitter joke aimed at a government that seemed to have abandoned them. And yet, the stew kept those families alive. Hoover stew was the taste of the Great Depression itself, cheap, filling, and stubborn. A full pot conjured from cans and defiance when the country had nothing left to give. Across all 30 entries, from the humble onion sandwich that opened our list to the emblematic Hoover stew at the very top, these forgotten meals tell a powerful story of hunger, ingenuity, and the refusal to give up. Some, like ketchup soup and water pie, stand out as shocking reminders of how little families had. Others, like depression cake and mulligan stew, reveal how sweetness and community could be coaxed from almost nothing. The common thread is resourcefulness, stretching every penny, wasting nothing, and turning scarcity into a meal. In the end, these 30 dishes are more than recipes. They are the taste of a generation that endured the worst and still found a way to fill the table.